Good morning, everyone. My name is Kimberly Craig. I'm the President and CEO of the Monterey County Business Council. Thank you for joining us today. We're pleased to partner with the Small Business Development Center, also known as SBDC, to offer these time-sensitive topics to you via webinar every Friday. The Monterey County Business Council is a membership-based organization that works together with private business, the public sector, and nonprofit organizations. We're always looking to expand our network, so if you think we're doing good work, we'd love to have you as a member. You can find our membership application on our website, which is www.mcbc.biz. Additionally, our partners at the SBDC provide no-cost one-on-one business counseling, workshops, and webinars to businesses in Monterey and San Benito counties who register for their services at calcoastalsbdc.com. We are in our 9th week of our commitment to regularly communicating with you in the business community. When you registered, you gave us your email address. We will have more of these free webinars over the next few weeks, and we'll let you know of upcoming discussions on small business opportunities and timely updates that affect you. I do want to thank our partners, the SBDC, the City of Salinas, and the County of Monterey, also the U.S. Small Business Administration and the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. Additionally, I want to give out a shout out to Luis Alvarez of Alvarez Technology Group. The team over there is producing our webinar today. With that, I'd like to introduce Zoe Carter, our Director of Operations, who will go over a few housekeeping items. Zoe?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Zoe Carter, and I'm the Director of Operations here at the Monterey County Business Council. I'll be moderating behind the scenes today, and I do want to encourage everybody to ask as many questions as you would like. The Q&A feature is at the bottom of your screen where you can enter all the questions you may have. We're also recording the webinar this morning, and you'll be sent a link of the recording after we're completed here with all the information for you to review. We will also send you contact information for all of our speakers. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Zoe. And with that, I'd like to formally introduce our speakers today. We do have an all-star cast. Monterey County Chief Administrative Officer, Charles McKee, representing the Monterey Peninsula, District 5 Supervisor, Mary Adams, and representing North County and North Salinas, District 2 Supervisor, John Phillips. Welcome, everyone. With that, we'll get started. Everyone, welcome Supervisor Mary Adams. Welcome, Mary.
Good morning, Kimberly. Thank you so much for that introduction and also for the great invitation for us to share your platform with a lot of the businesses in our community and our surrounding region. Today, we're going to talk about the subject that I think is on most people's minds, and obviously that is the impact of the coronavirus, COVID-19, on businesses in our community. We wanted to bring you up to date on what the county has been doing and how we have been working to help businesses through this terrific pandemic. We have Sarah Hargrave driving our presentation today. So if you see that someone named Sarah is asking to share your screen, that will be our Sarah, who is my policy advisor. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about where we stand with the Monterey County Variance Attestation, which is the product that will allow us to move from phase 2 to phase 2.5, as we're calling it. We will have our CAO, Charles McKee, discuss elements of the attestation. And then we will go with my colleague, Supervisor John Phillips, who will give an overview of what we've been doing in the Ad Hoc Committee on Hospitality. Supervisor Phillips and I are the co-chairs of that ad hoc. Then we will go back to what we have to do to stay open safely, because as much as we all want to move forward, there are certain metrics that we have to ensure we maintain in order to remain open. If we don't hit those metrics, we go all the way back to the beginning, and none of us wants to do that. Then we will talk about the guidelines and the checklists for businesses, and then we'll talk about next steps, where we're going next. After that, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So with that, I will turn it over to my supervisor in charge of a lot of the things that we do, County Administrative Officer, Charles McKee.
Thank you, Supervisor Adams. I appreciate that opportunity, and I appreciate the opportunity also to talk to the Monterey County Business Council and your members. I had the chance early in my tenure as CAO to talk to the Business Council, and I think that was a great opportunity to introduce myself to you and talk a little bit about some of the priorities that we have for assisting Monterey County businesses. Obviously, in this pandemic time, it's critical that we have a great working relationship between the business community and the county to, how we can survive and how we can thrive coming out of the pandemic. As Supervisor Adams mentioned, there are aspects of this that the state is working on, aspects of this that the county is working on, and we have to follow the lead of the state. As the slide right there presents, the state has a roadmap to recovery. Stage one, as you will see there, was back in March when everybody had the lockdown come, the health officer orders shelter in place, the state shelter in place positions, and that's the stage one, safety and preparedness. How to, it was jumping on it quickly to try and make sure that the numbers in the state of California and the county of Monterey remained low, and even some counties were able to almost prevent it completely from entering their jurisdictions. We as a state fared very well when you compare us to other states considering our size, and we as a county have fared very well in our numbers considering our size, and also our relationship to both the agricultural industry and our fellow counties to the east and the counties north and south of us. So we've done a really good job. The next thing that the state focused on was changing from that safety and preparedness concept to looking at a more risk-based aspect, which is the stages 2, 3, and 4. And now we're into stage 2, which is looking at high risk, low risk businesses. So Sarah, if you can move to the next slide. So Monterey County, as Supervisor Adams pointed out, is in stage 2, as is the state. And this, I know this is a little bit of a busy slide, but if you look at the bottom left, stage 1, those are the businesses were essential businesses. That's what was allowed to open right away when the pandemic first hit back in March. Now we're in the yellow in stage 2, and there was we're still in what's called, I guess, early stage 2 in many respects. And you had some of the original businesses that were opening, some of the manufacturing, we moved into construction, then we moved into landscaping, gardening, those kinds of activities to look at as a risk-based analysis of what could be open in the state and in Monterey County. And the state then put out criteria to open more quickly through stage 2, and Monterey County was not going to be able to meet the criteria for moving more quickly through stage 2 under the initial criteria. However, approximately 2 weeks ago, the governor changed the criteria and eased the criteria somewhat, such that many other jurisdictions, Monterey County included, would meet the new criteria. And that's where we are seeking a variance with an attestation from the health officer. The health officer has to attest, he has to certify that we're going to meet the new criteria in under phase 2 reopening to be able to move more quickly through phase 2. And those are the items that are kind of in the bottom right categories of you see in that yellow what we were looking at originally at the beginning of this week, the criteria that we were going to set forth to meet those new businesses in stage 2. However, as the board was considering seeking a variance on Tuesday, so Monday and Tuesday, the governor announced additional easing, so you didn't need a variance. And that's where we had in-store retail, pet grooming, car washes, and religious organizations. And so those are now allowed without a variance in stage 2. Any county can do those. The businesses and the institutions have to adhere to protocols. And now with the attestation that we filed on Tuesday, it's that bottom right under stage 2 on that chart there where you have dine-in restaurants, hair salons, and barbershops. So the attestation variance pieces that we filed on Tuesday with the state, which we're still waiting to get approval, are those last 2 pieces down there at the bottom right. We're on stage 2. Stage 3 and 4 are later to come. There may be aspects of stage 3 where the governor will move them into stage 2, like he did with some other entities such as religious organizations, hair salons, and that's something we'll have to wait to see. So the message for this slide here is that we are in early stage 2. We're in stage 2 with what are considered lower risk businesses and workplaces with modifications. And the message that everyone has to take is that if we're going to open up these businesses, you have to follow the protocols, the guidelines that the state has on their website. And you have to meet those guidelines and certify that you have trained your employees and you're ready to go. All right, Sarah. So the readiness criteria to move through, get that variance and move through stage 2 is mainly a stability piece. And capacity piece. Do we have the stability in our test numbers? Do we have the hospital capacity? Are we protecting vulnerable populations? And we meet all of those criteria, except we are very close on the new case numbers. And I'll talk about that again in a moment, but we're very close on those new case numbers. And what we've seen recently is actually an uptick in our case numbers. And we want to make sure that we stay below those total case numbers so that we can remain open. Thanks, Sarah. So if we exceed any of the triggers that we may need to modify, we may have to go backwards, and we don't want to do that. So we want to, these are some examples of some of the triggers that we're looking at to make sure that we can stay open through the variance if we get it. And you can look at that bottom line there is kind of one of the easier ones for me to understand. The case doubling rate. When we submitted our attestation, we were at a case doubling rate of 29 days. And we are putting in a trigger proposal to the state that if we get below 8 days in a doubling rate, then we may have to reimpose restrictions. We definitely do not want to get there. But I will say over the last several days, our case numbers have increased due in many respects to Mother's Day activities, Memorial Day activities, and just the general, pent-up angst that people have to get out and enjoy the beautiful Monterey County. And while that's important, we also want to recognize that to stay open and not have additional restrictions, we want to keep these numbers low. Thank you, Sarah. So our containment plan, if it happens, is that we have to make sure that we have the capacity to ramp up testing, and we're at our volume max right now on testing of non-symptomatic people. We have to have our contact tracing up. We have to make sure that we have all the protocols in place to help those who live in congregate living situations, mainly our agricultural workers, as well as our homeless. We have to be able to protect them. We have skilled nursing facilities, your nursing homes. We have to make sure that we have right procedures in place for the nursing homes. And most importantly, our essential workers. If we're going to keep our grocery stores open and our healthcare workers on the job and our police and fire, we have to make sure that those workers have protections and they have the proper PPE, as everybody knows, the personal protective equipment. That we are engaging with our community like we're doing. We're engaging with the cities, that everybody has plans in place to address if there's a need to have a containment plan go into place. Thanks, Sarah. So when the attestation goes into the state, which we did on Tuesday, we also as a county will need to ask the health officer to issue a new shelter-in-place order because his previous shelter-in-place orders had some restrictions. However, when the state modified what was going to be allowed in stage 2, our previous health officer order would be consistent with following the state. So all those items under early stage 2 there you see at the top now are allowed under the new shelter-in-place order, or really the one that was issued before. And we're going to have to issue another shelter-in-place order as soon as the state posts our attestation to do what's down at the bottom, expanded stage 2. the dine-in restaurants and hair salons. So the items that are above at the beginning there, early stage 2, are ready to go. They have to make sure that they meet all the guidelines at the state level. And we're going to have the new shelter-in-place order go out for the expanded stage 2 with that station at the bottom. Thank you, Sarah. I will turn it over now to our esteemed former judge and supervisor for District 2, Supervisor John Phillips.
Thank you. You know, the ad hoc committees that you sure heard about started with some of us supervisors that were concerned. We felt we had to start making some inroads to reopening businesses and do it safely. But if we didn't, we were going to start losing support and confidence of the citizens. And you know, to some of us, there was an unfairness about when initially we made the determination. Some things were essential, some weren't, and that was kind of a subjective determination. You know, as I like to tell people, every business is essential to someone, or they wouldn't be in business. So marijuana, hardware stores, liquor stores, bicycle shops were considered essential, where construction, gardeners, retail wasn't. So also there was the feeling of us on the board that you had to start balancing the physical safety versus the mental health of those people who were stuck at home with no job or the prospect of losing their business. So we formed the idea of 2 supervisors would be an ad hoc committee who would meet with the industry and develop those protocols that would allow the business to open in a manner that still protected the employees and the public. And in doing that, we found that you really had to rely on the industry to help develop those protocols, because they know how their business works. So our goal was to put together a protocol that we could present to Dr. Marino, the health director, and convince him that it was safe to modify the orders to allow the reopening. And we usually present that, you know, when Mary and I do, when we present it, we have Elsa, who's the head of the health department, and Charles is there, and the county council. So like the first one I was involved with was trying to get construction reopened. And I did that with Supervisor Lopez. And about the same time, Mary Adams and I worked with the golf community, and we worked with Bill Perocki and Bob Rosenthal, representing the public and private, but we talked to all the golf community, and the golf community had been involved with the golf community across the nation to develop those protocols. So we were able to get that instituted and get golf courses open, which was a big thing because people really needed to get out and get some exercise and get out in the open air. And we did that in conjunction with getting our parks back open. The next was restaurants, and Supervisor Adams and I worked extensively with MCHA, the hospitality community, Canterbury Row Company, Ted Ballesteri and Teddy, who's on the governor's task force. We even went out to the Shakes restaurant to see what they were doing to implement the changes. Pebble Beach Company was involved, and eventually, as we'll talk about in a minute, we developed the state guidelines, which provided the protocols with a county-wide assessment on it. We worked primarily with the chambers developing the retail for in-store work. We worked with Laguna Seca, Johnny Narigi out there to get the track rentals back open up, and as you've probably heard, to open it up so we can have school graduations there. We are presently starting to work with the hotels and lodging. And I know every time we start talking about that, the governor has put that in stage 3, but it's important, especially for our county, that we get our hotels open back up. And the obstacle you always hit there is when you have a shelter in place, that's going to encourage people to travel. But it's I think Mary and my feeling that they're traveling anyway, as you saw this last weekend. It's better to do it in an organized, more proactive way and having the hotels open. The other things we're working on, day before yesterday, Mary and I met with Monterey Bay Aquarium, who have put together excellent protocols of how their facility can open up. Bike rentals, charter boats, campgrounds, either at Laguna Seca, private and public, car show that Pasadena wants to have. So those are the things that we have to work on now. They're a little more difficult to put together when you don't have a statewide protocol that's been developed for it that we'll talk about in a minute. So some of these, like charter boats, we may have to take and work on ours and maybe steal a little bit and plagiarize from what's been done in San Francisco and some of the other ones. So do you want me to go on to the state protocols, Charles?
Yes.
Sure, why don't you do that? Thank you.
And, you know, we worked up our protocols, and after all this work we did, then the state came out with the industry guide for these protocols, and they have one, and it is good, because then we know that we're not going to submit a protocol that the state's going to say, well, this isn't sufficient, this isn't accurate. These are been approved by the state, the state powers to be, and OSHA approved, and so those for the bigger industries, that's a very easy way for the county then to say, okay, that's it. In some ways, these aren't as restrictive as our own industry is working here in Monterey County had come up with. So there's one for retail and dine-in restaurants and hair salons and barbershops, shopping malls, destination shopping, and those things. So those are what we're relying on almost exclusively when we're coming online with these various things. So, and I think the county or the state may be developing more of these. I know, like the aquarium is working with other aquariums in the state to come up with some protocols and guidelines that would apply to all aquariums, not just ours. But I got to say, they worked at very extensive protocols that was impressive to cut down the number of people in, but keep everybody flowing in the right direction and still make everything safe. So those are some of the things we've been working on. Mary and I have been working almost 24/7 on these, trying to get businesses open back up in a safe environment. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I think we'll go back to Charles. Thank you.
Great, thank you, supervisors. Appreciate that. As Supervisor Phillips was mentioning, all these different protocols that we've been working on with the industry, and these different sectors have come forward. And although the state has then usurped our efforts in some areas, the benefit has been that many of these businesses and industry sectors have gotten a great idea ahead of time about what they would need to do and what are some of the best practices. And some of them have been even more detailed than what the state has required. But ultimately, right now, many of the ones that are open should be referring back to the state guidelines for the minimum that they need to do, and then looking at their own protocols that we may have set up here locally for some additional guidelines that might help benefit them on reopening. One of the areas where we had some great collaboration early on was the construction industry protocols, and where they jumped on that quickly to try and find some really good details about what they could put in place. And what was interesting with that one is that they went and put together some protocols that were very detailed and put a lot of limitations on them. And when the county was looking at opening potentially construction under our own shelter orders, we had some protocols. We were looking at some protocols that were pretty restrictive, and the business community contacted the county, the construction industry, and started to ask questions about different pieces of it. And we collaborated then with the health officer to say, well, are these really appropriate? Are these what are needed? And we went around and looked to see if we could simplify it. In the end, we adopted a protocol that was one page and far simpler than even what the industry had put forward. And the industry then could then have those minimum guidelines that we put in our shelter-in-place order, and use their own protocols for an extended safety measures that they might think are appropriate for their businesses. But it was a great collaboration to ultimately get some measures in place that were needed. And so this slide right here is talking about what do we need to do to safely reopen, and it's all those protocols that we're talking about. And the state is now making these a requirement that every business, before they open, has to do a risk assessment, has to implement a safety plan, a specific plan. You have to train your employees on how to stay safe and how to limit the spread. And the key one there is obviously stay home if you can. And there's a lot of pressure on that one. And the employees who may think or suspect that they have COVID, but they don't know yet. Those are the ones that we want to make sure are not pushing the envelope and spreading. And we understand that could be an impact on businesses, but the best practices there will help us keep safely open once we reopen. You have to have individual control measures and screenings for your individual businesses. Great. Everybody has to have those disinfecting protocols. That's the obvious one that everybody thinks about. And then the physical distancing guidelines. So these are the things that every business has to do. And what we're encouraging businesses is also to post on your business site, on your websites, on your windows, if you have windows to your business, which will provide a sense of confidence for your customers that you're ready to go, and that opening is ready for your business. And for those businesses like dining restaurants who are not open yet but are ready to go, and when the attestation goes up, are ready to go, the Environmental Health Department has just posted some recommendations on what you could be doing right now to get prepared to open. And because when the attestation gets posted, we know that the restaurants and others are going to, the hair salons are going to be ready to go. And so there's some guidelines and recommendations on the environmental health website for restaurants at this point. And the hair salons and those should be looking at the state guidelines to get ready to open, because we know it's not a turn of the key that just means that you're open. We know that there are a lot of things that you have to do as businesses to be ready for your customers, and we appreciate that complexity. So thank you, Sarah. I'll turn it back to Supervisor Adams.
Thanks very much, Charles. That was really informative. So where are we now, and what are the next steps? As Charles indicated, just sort of subtext, what we're now in the position of waiting for the State Department, California Department of Public Health, to post the attestation form that we submitted, the attestation form and our containment plan. As soon as we see that posted, and believe me, we are checking every minute of every day, then we're able to boom into phase 2.5. We submitted it Tuesday at 2:23 p.m., just after the Board of Supervisors approved it, and we expected that we would have heard back by now. I expect that a lot of the larger counties are putting their attestations up. So, I mean, they've been bogged down for quite a while, but we keep watching, and as soon as we do have the information, I have a feeling that we'll probably hire a plane and have the little flag fly over Monterey Peninsula telling people, yes, it's a go. But that's a really important part. The other thing that I think is really important to know is that Charles had mentioned the metrics, and you saw those metrics of what we need to ensure we do, that we keep the numbers at a certain point, or we have to go backwards. And that happened up in Lassen County, in the northern part of our state, in the north, in the Eastern Sierra. And it's so dispiriting to people. I mean, you brought your employees back to work, you have your business up and running, and because the people perhaps were not as diligent as they should have been with maintaining safe distances, with wearing their face masks, they had a number of cases that came forward, so they've had to go backwards. More than anything, we don't want that to happen in our county. So that's a really important part of ensuring when we do get to 2.5 that we can stay there. I skipped over this one bullet point that you see, and that is the issuance of a new shelter-in-place order. So as Supervisor Phillips had indicated, when we submitted our attestation form and the containment plan, we also had already produced the new shelter-in-place order. So they will be concurrent. As soon as we get the attestation approved or essentially posted, then the issuance of the new shelter-in-place order will also be enforced and will be all ready to roll. One of the other things that's really important that we need to be focused on now as well is ensuring that the workforce is educated on all of the, and the protocols are known to all of the workers, as well as the people who are coming to the businesses that are now open, and that we comply with the protocols for each of those businesses allowed to reopen. That part is really critical. And I know that the Monterey County Hospitality Association is going to be using the Monterey Conference Center as a training site for employees in the hospitality industry. And it's going to be on COVID and the new protocols. There is a lot of information that's out there, and I believe they're going to be starting that as soon as June. That's really going to be an important element of what it is that we do, because that will help us stay on the path so that we don't have to go backwards. At this point, I think we've completed the things that we wanted to talk about. My expectation is that you have a number of questions that you would like to ask, and if you will allow us, all three of us, and Kimberly, of course, as well, will attempt to answer them for you. So with that, I'll turn it back to Kimberly with a thank you.
Mary, I just wanted to add, in being in touch with these restaurants, most of the bigger restaurants are ready to get going. They've been working on this now for at least a couple weeks and getting their people prepared, getting all the things in place, and educating all their personnel. So they're ready to go, and really doing a commendable job of doing it the right way. So,
you know, I thought of another thing I wanted to mention, and that is this: that when we talk about why this is so important, you all know that hospitality is our major employer, our major economic base over here on the peninsula. And if we have business open, then the workers can come back to work. Then the residents and the visitors can return, which will then lead to income revenue being generated, because that's what funds the tax base. And then that tax base funds all the services that we all use. So it's really a full circle. And we want to ensure that not one element of that circle is lacking. So it's going to take a lot of us to ensure that people feel confident going back to restaurants and to shops once we do have our attestation posted. So that really requires a lot of, I think, sort of a certain kind of discipline to make sure that when you do go out, you follow all of the rules. And I always carry a can of Lysol with me, so who knows what's next.
That's a pretty hot item these days, a can of Lysol. So, you know, if you can just where you may have purchased that would be wonderful for the several hundred people that are on the webinar today. I'm going to go ahead and go through some of the questions. We have about 25 minutes to go through them. If I could have CAO McKee possibly on, as well as Supervisor Adams and Supervisor Phillips. And I'll just let the three of you sort of fight it out depending on your level of expertise. How about that?
It happens all the time.
So the first question, we're going to try to go in order. We've tried to answer some of the questions behind the scenes, and some of these are very specific, but I think people have some questions about what type of industry they would fall under, you know, what phase, if they're not covered, you know, in the list of businesses, where would they find out where they would be? So the first question is, the wedding industry is huge in Monterey County. However, I have not seen any reopening plans for even smaller weddings, which have become quite popular in Monterey County. Weddings help support hotels and many vendors, including photographers, officiants, florists, musicians, and more. With weddings in stage 3, how can we ensure that the wedding industry is represented and get a plan in place? We already have reached out to the county health department.
Well, in my opinion, I think as far as the ad hoc committees go, I think a wedding would come under the hospitality ad hoc committee because it is an event in many ways, and it also has a lot of business surrounding it that would be hospitality oriented. So in my opinion, that's the category that we would have it under. I don't think Supervisor Phillips and I have really spent much time at this point looking at the weddings. And I'm curious whether or not the weddings that are being, the person who asked the question is referring primarily to outdoor weddings, or if he's talking about weddings inside hotels, because then it would be a very different picture. Then it becomes a big event, and that's definitely in phase 3. So what do you think, John?
Yeah, I would think, obviously, if it's in a hotel, it's different than outside. But we're looking, I mean, like, for instance, they're looking about doing, some of them doing some car shows coming up in August. I would think it'd be kind of the same thing on looking at a wedding that's outdoors and having the protective things. And one of the things that was brought to us, we'd probably look to see if there's any other counties that are addressing the same issue that we could be consistent with them and how we would do it. But you're right. I think it would fall into our hospitality ad hoc, but there's a big difference indoor, outdoor. You know?
Right.
Understood. Well, thank you. I think that's a pretty comprehensive answer. So hopefully we'll have greater knowledge of the support industries, hospitality industry here in Monterey County. I do have a note that Sarah Hardgrave would like to answer this question live. What is the status of outdoor activities such as tennis and pickleball, both play and instruction?
I apologize. I meant to actually type in an answer and I clicked the wrong button. But I wanted to share that there is a allowance under the state guidance at this time for singles tennis. And that information can be found on the state's Q&A portion of their website. Thank you.
If I could add on to that, I think one of the pieces that can be confusing is finding information. And I think that's kind of the beginning of what the question about the weddings is, that finding information is really hard, is really difficult, and we understand that. When you go to the state's webpage, as Sarah mentioned, there's a Q&A button, and it took us a while to figure out that a lot of their answers to these questions, like Q&A, are there. There isn't really a good separate page where it says a good listing. Here's what's open. Here's what's not. And you can kind of work through those Q&A pieces, and it'll pull up all the different types of things that you might not be aware of that are open or allowed to operate.
Yeah, but it's like that one, for example, I can't see any reason you could allow single tennis and not single pickleball. But maybe they just hadn't focused on it, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Right, yeah, and they allow single canoeing, but they don't mention kayaking. It's like, okay, well, okay.
That's very funny. Well, the next question, actually, I think probably would be directed towards CAO McKee. Combine the two questions of two different people. Are you getting any feedback as to why the state has not approved attestation? And how long do you think it'll take for the state to approve the Monterey County attestation?
Well, thank you, Kimberly, and I appreciate you calling me out specifically, because one thing I learned early in my career in government is don't get between a camera and an elected official. So, or
a former one, for that matter.
There you go. So on the relationship with the state, they did have a few questions for us about our attestation, and that was the first piece, which we slowed it down a little bit. And most of the questions they asked were actually answered if you read the attestation that we provided. So we didn't want to call that out in that way, but just to let read the document. But there were some questions that we've answered now. We've also heard back that essentially they're working through all the new attestations that they've gotten, and the difference is the first time around the attestations were pretty simple in the sense that the early counties were these really small counties that clearly met the criteria, and now we're talking about bigger counties with also many more businesses. And I think that my understanding is the state's taking longer just to review all those.
Understood. Thank you. Are cases increasing due to the increase in testing that we are seeing with all of the new testing centers?
Go ahead.
I think, yeah, we've done a commendable job of ramping up our testing. We're at full capacity in Gonzales and Salinas, and now with the work that Mary Adams and Supervisor Parker's done on the peninsula. So that's a big part of it. But I think the other part of it is we've like was mentioned, Memorial Day and Mother's Day. I think some people just didn't abide by the rules that we were all trying to abide by, and they got together for some family gatherings that had a negative impact on our numbers.
Understood. Thank you. On to the next question. This one comes from one of our larger recreational facilities. When will private events for 50 to 250 people be allowed?
I think that's, again, looking at stage 3. You know, there's no question about it. And the governor has been very clear that he wants to ensure that he keeps the health of the people of the state of California at the fore. And I expect that it would be very difficult to have a gathering of 250 or 300 people and have 6-foot social distancing work. So my expectation is that we're not going to see that in the close future.
Yeah, but I know
this is the way we do.
Yeah, no, but it all depends on the venue too. I know John Narigi wants to talk to Supervisor Adams and I about down the road in a couple of months being able to at a big venue like Laguna Seca be able to spread people out enough so that you could have some spectators if they're spread out on top of the hill, and if you do have the booths that people are going to, you spread them out like you do in a store, and there will be between them. So I mean, there's if you can do it in the right way, and you have a big enough venue, outdoor venue, to safely do it, you know. So yeah. That's something we have to look at, you know, obviously.
One of the pieces I would add, kind of going back to the wedding question, is that, and it kind of falls on what Supervisor Phillips was just saying, is being creative. And if there are creative ways that these events can occur, it's something that we'll try and push with the state and any contacts we have with the state to say, you know, you may say these large events can't happen in general, but maybe you could figure out state ways to allow events to occur if they're creative in putting them forward in a safe manner.
And it's kind of what we see with the restaurants saying, hey, we're going to move outside. We're going to close off some streets and to have more outdoor dining because we're impacted. And I thought that was a pretty innovative thing that it really kind of caught on. So I think you're right. We have to be more innovative and look at that.
Thank you. One of these questions is not business related, but more related to family. Obviously, with kids being indoors and parents trying to work full time, when will kids be able to play organized sports again? Which stage will this be? My office has been working with Warren Whalen, who's kind of representing the Pony League, soccer leagues, to see what kind of things and protocols we can put in place that would allow kids to start doing some things, because that's one of the biggest frustrations we hear is the kids stuck at home, and how do they get to do some productive things. So we're trying to put together protocols where maybe the kids won't be in the dugout, but will be spread out more, so they're not in a crowded, congested area, and put some protocols, because I think it's important that we get the kids doing out there some constructive ways to get some exercise and to start enjoying life a little bit.
And we can take some examples from the schools that are also talking about keeping cohorts of 12 as an example. So if kids play on a team and there are no more than 12 that they're interacting with on a close basis, should something develop, it would be an easier group to contain for the contact tracing effort.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Our next question, actually, we have a few questions over charter sailboats. And so I know Supervisor Phillips, you covered some of that. Wondering when you think charter sailboats might be able to get back up and running if they can maintain all CDC and state compliance. And wondering if they can open now or do they need to wait for a particular phase?
I think they have to wait for a particular phase. I asked that question in a meeting we were in yesterday, and they said no. I did get some from Chris's fishing boats, some proposed protocols that they thought they could institute that would have the social distancing and the other things. And they seem to think that similar charter boats were open up in San Francisco. And so I was having my staff trying to look to see if we can find out what they did there that allowed them to get open. But as of right now, it's not permitted in here. But with what I saw that was presented, at least to me, I'd have to have Supervisor Adams look at it, obviously, and we look at it together. But it looked like the protocols they put together was pretty protective and comprehensive.
Thank you. Next question. We're a small office with 3 employees. Would we be able to return to the office versus telecommuting in phase 2.5?
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes, but if the state recommendations are still, if you can allow telecommuting or staggering of schedules, that's the recommendation.
I've been wondering about that because I want Charles to give me the okay to start opening up my office again.
Yeah, but I've been lobbied by your staff against that, so sorry.
I know that. I'm old school. If I'm not at work, I feel like a bum. You know, so.
They're actually looking to telecommute for the rest of your term, Supervisor.
Yeah. You must have been talking about that.
Next question. I believe this should be for CAO McKee, since you come from a legal background. This is a question pertaining to services provided by legal offices. Are in-person depositions allowed? And as far as investigators and process service to achieve personal service, is this allowed? And if so, what safety measures are required?
That's a great question. I think that the deposition aspect is allowed under the similar guise of office operations. And clearly you'd have to make sure that you adhere to the proper protocols of distancing and sanitation and disinfecting and all those kinds of things. So I do think it's allowed. The process serving is a little trickier, I think, because you're taking a piece of paper that the summons complaint, that whatever you're serving, and handing it to someone. There is some allowance for some mail type of service in some situations, but not in all. And I understand that, and I apologize. I don't know where that would fall specifically, and I'm happy to try and look into it, see if I can get some answers to that and get back to you, Kimberly.
And perhaps when we send out the link with this webinar, we can also send out a link with the Q&A for the state website. That way people can do a little bit of their own research to determine whether or not their business or company is listed in certain areas in certain phases.
Yeah, and I think the other piece on that, on the service of process, my guess is that the DA and the sheriff have been doing some of that already, and so I should probably find out exactly what are you doing? How are you doing it safely? Understood.
Thank you. This is a good question. With Pebble Beach and 2 Hyatts mentioning a reopening date of June 15th, is the expectation that we will reach the beginning of stage 3 by June 15th?
I hope so. You know, I obviously getting restaurants open is a good start, but with the summer coming up, it's obvious that that our restaurants can't thrive without our visitors, and so hotels is a big part of that. And as I mentioned, I think hotels are some of the safest places where, compared to hair salons and even restaurants, are easier to keep maintained and clean and keep everybody safe. And they can do it in a way where there's almost very limited direct contact other than when the people go to their room. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to put together the protocols because people are going to be traveling anyway. And that's been the big obstacle to get hotels open. But I know Supervisor Adams and I feel strongly that we have to get our hotels open to really keep the peninsula economy thriving, and other places, but primarily Peninsula. And I think we're both devoted to working towards that and trying to the state
figure it out.
Yeah.
And I know
Well,
there's been some discussion, forgive me, a little bit of discussion about looking at the different types as well. You know, as a motel where you drive up, park, and go in, is that the same as a high-rise hotel? And a little inn, is that different? And where do short-term rentals come into play? And what about the bed and breakfast? So it isn't really just a big catch-all. And I think as we move forward, we're starting to realize that there's a lot of work ahead.
And it's important. It's important that the state recognizes that we're not exactly like San Francisco. Their hotels are 20 stories, 25 stories. Ours are a lot different and easier than I think to maintain.
And newer.
Yeah. And it's so that's important. But yeah. And the thing is, the difficult thing for the hotel and all the businesses is they need to know in advance with some certainty of where we're going to be. And that's been the biggest frustration for businesses is if we could just tell them when it's coming up, because they have to train their people, and they have to, like the restaurants, they have to buy their food, and they have to make the structural changes that are necessary, move the tables out, move them around, put the partitions up. They have to do that. And we have to give them, it's only fair that we give them some predictable advance notice when we're going to make the changes that would allow them to open up.
My take on the timing would be that it's going to be dependent on the numbers, the testing, and what happens as we ease restrictions and how that affects statewide.
Yeah.
I want to make a point as well. There are some hotels and motels that are open now, but they are only open for essential workers. So or some of the hotels have been opened to allow people who have been exposed to COVID-19 to have an opportunity for them to be sequestered, essentially, so that they can ensure that they don't have it. So there are some hotels that are operating, but for very, very specific points.
We had a lot of essential workers over Memorial Day weekend then.
That's amazing, isn't it?
I wonder, since we've changed and added some other things there, do we consider them essential workers now? The retail workers, I don't know. So
that's a good segue to our next question. As we see more allowed visitors to our community, we see an increased frustration with outdoor crowding and mask wearing variations. Could we see more specific guidance on circumstances that require masks? We would benefit from a regional agreement so visitors could be educated. Specifically, do people need to wear a mask when walking on the rec trail? Or is the risk of essential activity low enough that the walkers don't need a mask?
Do you want to answer that, Charles?
Sure. Technically, if there's no one else basically on the path, and you're recreating and exercising, then you don't have to have a mask on. The issue is when you come in close distance to someone else who's not within your household, and at that point you are required to have a mask on, even on the rec trail. on the more remote trails that are out there, some of the open space areas, it's going to be a little more flexible in the sense that there's opportunity to allow the distancing from other people. But technically, if you're coming in close distance, even outside, you're supposed to have a mask.
Yeah,
Face cover.
I would analogize it to where we kind of went with golf. And I know most of the golf courses are handing out a mask if someone doesn't have a mask when they first get there. And they're expected to use it when they're around other people, but when they're out just with their group, not near anybody, they wouldn't be wearing the mask. So yeah. I think it's the same thing. But yeah.
And one issue, a side issue with a lot of your business owners here, they have employees, and and you have customers coming in, and the fact that it's mandatory gives them a ability to say, look, it's a mandate from the state or the county, and you have to do it. And similarly, as an employer, the employee that's coming to your operation, they have to bring their own face covering because anytime they go outside, they have to have it. If you make it a guideline as opposed to a mandate, in my opinion, you're going to have a lot of situations where there's going to be conflict over whether somebody should or shouldn't or has to or not wear a face covering.
Yeah, I agree, and I think our county's stepping up our public relations campaign to get the word out that these protocols are to be followed, face covering and the social distancing, and we're trying to get that. And I think we on the peninsula have to do what we can to educate everybody coming in that these are the rules and you got to abide by them.
Yeah.
With that, we are coming around to our 11 o'clock hour. I know the supervisors have meetings immediately following this, as well as CAO McKee. So I'm going to end with one final question that's been asked in different formats in different ways. So this may be for CAO McKee. Do we submit reopening plans to the health department, or if we're hospitality based, to the hospitality ad hoc committee for approval?
There's no requirement to submit plans for approval. Obviously, if anybody has the time to review it and they want somebody to review it, that's something we could consider. But it's always going to be a time-based. There's an obligation for every business to basically self-attest at this point. Restaurants are going to be a little bit different because they are regulated by the Environmental Health Department. Not that they have to submit the plans, but Environmental Health, may check up on you. Excuse me.
Thank you. With that, I think that concludes our portion of the question and answers. We've answered approximately 50 questions, both online and offline. So I think we've done as best we can. We do have quite a few still left, so we'll do our best to send those along to the supervisors to get answered. And with that, I just want to conclude our webinar by thanking our partners, the SBDC, the City of Salinas, and the County of Monterey. Again, many thanks to Luis Alvarez of Alvarez Technology Group for running the webinar today. Just as a final reminder, we are recording this webinar and we'll send you a link with the recording so you can review today's program. We'll also send out the contact information for the offices of our speakers today. A really special thank you to Monterey County Chief Administrative Officer Charles McKee, District 5 Supervisor Mary Adams, and District 2 Supervisor John Phillips. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and have a great weekend. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.